My name is Shawn. You just saw the show that I did. I'm the founder of the Poop Project. And I would love to invite our panelists to introduce themselves because I think they're better at it than I would be.
Actually, if you could sing me an intro, Shawn, that would be great.
This is Hope Randall.
Testing? Oh, we're good. That was beautiful. Thank you. So, hey everyone, my name is Hope Randall, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a communications officer for PATH, which is a global health nonprofit. And one of the projects I work on is the Defeat Diarrheal Disease Initiative, otherwise known as Defeat DD. And we're a global communications and advocacy initiative that raises awareness about the global burden of diarrhea, which is actually still the second leading cause of child death around the world. And water, sanitation, and hygiene is a big part of what we advocate investment in. So that's me.
Thank you. Water for you.
What you gonna sing?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Julia Rosenbaum.
I like this. This is going to be very hard to do. I know where you're going. This is going to be really hard to do, though. After like your dynamic show, we're now going to talk about like death rates, inspiration, diarrhea.
Well, first just tell us what you do, and then we'll get to that.
I'm Julia Rosenbaum. I work right down the street, actually, at an NGO, Humongo, called FHI 360, where we try to take a 360-degree approach to solving problems. I'm a social behavior change systems specialist, and I try to bring science and creativity and community, which are hopefully not exclusive groups, but try and bring all those together.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Here, you get a water now. It's your reward.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Sauer. I'm a pooper! Woo! I'm the Senior Technical Advisor for WASH at PSI, which is Population Services International. We're also a global health nonprofit. And we work on private sector and government engagement to ensure better health services for consumers all around the world. And I support PSI's programs in sanitation, mostly helping to build markets so that sanitation services and products can reach more customers in countries that don't have those services. And I support the programs in India, Ethiopia, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Mali, and Kenya.
Wow, let's just give this panel a round of applause for the work that they do to begin. John, you've earned a water also.
I already had one.
Oh, you already had one? Well, now you've got two.
Hydration's
Or if anyone else, does anyone else need a glass of water? No, we've got one. Oh, well, you get a water. And you get a water. And if you brought your own cup, there's a pitcher here. So, well, I think, truly it really is an extraordinary thing to be with these three luminaries. And as I think you've also heard from John, so many folks who are in the profession are traveling a lot. So it was pretty extraordinary to find three people who were available and able to come down and talk to us and share about what they do. So I wanted to start with maybe a moment of reflection about the show itself and just ask, from what you saw, what resonated for you, particularly either about the situation here in sort of my diagnosis of that, and could be where that intersects with your work, but also the how the Potty Trained Us only touches in on the global sanitation crisis, on that situation. So what else should maybe this is where it might get a little depressing, but what else should our audience know? Because even though it's hard to hear, it's important for us to talk about, right? That's so much of what the piece is about. Why don't we go in reverse order? John, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think poo it's kind of a fun topic, as you've shown people, Shawn. So I think it can be a good entry point. I think, generally, though, there's sort of a lack of awareness of how lucky we are you showed some great photos of the infrastructure that we have in this country. Although, frankly, that's not always true for everybody. There's still a lot of rural communities in the United States that don't have access to sanitation services right now. But globally, I mean, let's break it down. Like, actually, 4 of the 7 billion people on planet Earth don't have access to the kind of services that we have, right? So, the markets that are out there, or the services that are out there, mostly serve wealthy customers. So I think that's the reflection, is like, this is a massive problem, and most people probably don't realize how actually ginormous it is.
Just adding, again, you touched on so many facets of the issue. I think one thing that's so striking to me about how you did present is how much clean, fresh water, 25-ish%, at least in the US, goes just to flushing shit down the toilet. And so much of what we work for is to get better access to water and to get access to what we call true sanitation. But I think you highlighted something that is so key too, is that we also need to sort of look at our sanitation systems and technologies, because such a goal, what's transformational, I mean, piped water has become transformational. You sort of look to see when countries turn, it's when, there's a predominance of piped water. And then you see literally going down the drain this resource. So the need to sort of refocus too our efforts was so striking about your show for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know, Shawn, one of the things you had asked us to reflect on is the nature of this taboo, not only in this country, but abroad. And I think one of the things that really surprised me when I started working in this area was traveling to places where diarrhea is a health crisis and a leading cause of child mortality. I was surprised to find that taboo still kind of existed, such that even in communities where the disease burden is high, even among families, there's not that awareness that diarrhea is a serious problem. Even in some of these villages that I visited, there was this sense that, diarrhea is just something that kids get. It's not a big deal, which was really surprising to me. And I think it's partly emblematic of sort of this fact that it's not talked about. And I think that it's definitely, I think that's not necessarily true of maybe every community around the entire world, but just a personal observation and what I've seen in places like Kenya and Zambia where I visited. Just surprised that it's not, it's still not really an open topic of conversation, even though it's killing children.
Yeah.
So,
Julia, do you want to add?
I wanted to add just that also shit. I agree that through most of the world, at least as I know it, feces is taboo. Talking about shit is taboo, but it's so contextual, because like infant shit, on the other hand, is benign, and animal shit is gold, actually, in many, especially agrarian cultures. And in Ethiopia, you clean your house by spreading a layer of fresh manure in the rural areas, because that taps down all the dirt and keeps everything tidy. So that shit's contextual, and I think that is important in also trying to break the taboos. Then you find some of those bridges, or where you can talk about it, you start there, and then you can push to the more taboo areas.
So it sounds like, even in all of our places, it's like there's some pedagogy of starting with a place that feels safe and comfortable and then going on from there. I wonder if folks would like to expand a little bit, for maybe people who haven't traveled, or I think it's really easy to talk about these things in an abstract, like lack of access to toilets, but what does that actually look like? What does that mean that people are happening? And when you think about the poo taboo, maybe there are some other examples of times you've seen that in the field, or something else, like a time where you were in some place and you thought, wow, Japan is one example that often comes up, where I think there's a bit of a tension in some ways, like it's a very poop taboo culture where there's a lot of cleanliness stuff, and in other ways, like we saw about the washlet toilets, there's a celebrated kind of poo culture. The emoji came from Japan. So that's one example that comes to mind for me that's more on the progressive front. But yeah, any other examples that could help us really crystallize what this might mean to deal with this issue or to work with the taboo? Does someone want to start?
Let's start.
Well, in terms of, I think, context setting, I mean, one of the major challenges we see, and sort of speaking in generalities, are rapid urbanization certainly is a big challenge. So people are flooding to cities and flooding literally with climate change being an issue. Refugee population, certainly conflict is another big theme that we're seeing. So, I think it just helps to paint a picture of when you have settings that are overcrowded and there's not really even any planning for sanitation at all. There's no system in place to begin with, let alone when there's lots of informal settlements. So that's sort of one extreme that I think policymakers are having a hard time even keeping pace. And then on the other extreme, you have underserved rural areas, which is a very different problem. So there's a lot of subnational variation on what the problems are and what it looks like. But I think, one thing that I really appreciate about your talk, Shawn, is the sewer system in the U.S., such that it is just not fit for purpose in many of the contexts in where we work and many places around the world. Given rapid urbanization, given overcrowding, given that we need something adaptable, flexible, and more so that taps into this regenerative cycle as well. Because I just think that there's a lot of sort of unsettled, in many ways, communities around the world where disease can spread and a lot of waste happening just in general, even in the best of circumstances, such that we have here. So that's context setting. I can speak about taboo maybe, but I'd like to hear my colleagues weigh in more there first.
Great examples that you gave. I tend to work more in rural areas, but I think it's so much more visible in urban areas when you have sort of lack of infrastructure and lack of planning, lack of systems. What does it mean, some of your question, what does it mean to have lack of sanitation? Biggest reason girls drop out of school in Africa is there is no toilet. That basic. One of the biggest reasons that teachers leave their rural posts is there is no toilet. And so it's such a sort of fundamental basic thing that has profound negative impact now, but can be so simple to address.
But can I push us to actually go a little further, which is to say, because there's no toilet, what are people doing? What's the option without the toilet?
Well, there is, what was the word you used? But like the toilet, when you don't go shit in the bathroom, you have to wait. So there's that waiting, there's open defecation. Is that where you're heading with this?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think
right. But more than anything, then in many cultures, parents pull, particularly their girls, but they just pull them out of school. So there's the physical, they go out and shit. And in rural areas, it's still an issue, but it's more dispersed. Uh-huh. But also to bring out what it means when there's no toilet. For school kids, for women, there's a tremendous amount of sexual assault that happens when then women have to go. So what happens is you can't leave your house, so you have to travel. You have to go out. If you go at night, usually you don't. You wait, which is painful. Oh. But there's tremendous amount of sexual assault. The flip side is when planners misplan and forget to consult who they're working with. Then you're like, great, we'll build latrines. But also in many cultures, the only time women get out of their house alone is to go with other women to take a shit. Because you have to go out and you move. So you have a half an hour with your girlfriends to talk and plan and do. And then we think we're so brilliant because we bring in that sanitation block really close, and then they lost that one time that they look forward to in the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, by the way, I have a washlet in my house, of course. But it's true. Even if there is that sanitation block, usually in a few years, that sanitation block doesn't work anymore. In fact, most of the places that I visited, in the last year in Ethiopia, you go into these towns and you see that there's just one failed sanitation project after the next failed sanitation project. So it's not just about building the infrastructure. It's just that there's no foresight into thinking through the operation and maintenance and the costing and all of those pieces. So that's where I think things start to break down. And if you, on the flip side of that, there is an incredible, not maybe switching the topic a little bit, but there is this incredible market opportunity, right? The Kenyan sanitation market was valued just for last year at over $3 billion. The Nigerian sanitation market was valued at over $15 billion. So and frankly, like those broken down toilet blocks, if they had been put, in place with an entrepreneur running them, maybe charging a few, pennies or whatever per use, so they could clean it and maintain it, they'd probably have an ongoing business that they could run, that there could be, some economic development. But, those projects don't generally think through that whole market system development piece, right? They build that infrastructure, and then they're like, oh, we've done our job, we built the infrastructure. But, it's not, you don't have to go very far to see all these broken down pieces. I think, there's a lot of exciting innovations happening. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that are doing amazing work. For example, there's the Sanitation Solutions Group in Uganda. There's Sanitation in Kenya. There's Pit Vidora in Rwanda. There's ATEC in Cambodia. There's Tiger Toilets, or I like the name of this one, Prime Move in India. And they're all addressing different parts of the sanitation value chain, right? From the toilets themselves to the containment to the treatment, and they're looking at innovative ways to treat and also reuse waste, right? So they're starting to do this, but I think what we've got to realize is if 4 of 7 billion people don't have these services, right? Or they're living in places where their environment is contaminated still by fecal waste. There's still a lot that we have to do to really get to the scale of citywide, district-wide, county-wide sanitation. And how are we going to do that? So actually, the way we're going to do that is through market development. And there's really 4 main aspects to that, right? And I think this shows that we can actually solve this challenge and solve this problem. One is that we have to make sure there's a good regulatory and policy environment so that businesses like those ones that should have been running those public toilet blocks that broke down can actually run and be effective, and so that governments are actually using their limited resources not to go in and then build another set of public toilet blocks, but actually spend that money on helping the poorest of the poor, really, with targeted and very transparent types of subsidies, right? For example, the second thing is just making sure that local businesses have the ability to access business development services so that they can sell their products properly. They can get the technical training they need. They can have capital to grow their businesses. All of those types of pieces. Third thing, make sure there's a good supply chain, right? Make sure that there's a desirable and affordable products and services that reach all the customer segments. Right now, like I said, only wealthy customer segments primarily have access to the product service they need. That's where this $15 billion market for Nigeria exists. And the last thing is that we have to keep growing these customer bases. And we do this through things like what Julia's team does, like through social behavior change, through sales and marketing, and through access to finance. So I think there's, those are the ways that we can, I think, turn the problem around.
So maybe, Hope, do you want to respond?
Yeah.
I was just going to bring up the point that John made, I think is so important, which is just having toilets that people want to use. Because, you asked, what does this look like? I mean, like Julie was saying, people wait under the cover of darkness in rural areas. It's not hard to find a place to go that's just in the open field. But in crowded cities, it's harder, but people do it, and you just kind of see poop everywhere, wherever people can find space. One thing that I remember learning in India is that, in the Hindu culture, it's actually, speaking of socialization, it's fascinating. It's considered gross to defecate in your home, that there's a space inside of your home that you would do that. It's actually considered more pure to do it out in the open. And when you think about a toilet that isn't well maintained, that's dirty, that's stinky, I understand that. There are toilets that you actually don't want to use. So I think continuing to, we're talking about dignified experience, having a toilet that people want to use is an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, And I feel like this is an example I've heard before too, where if you have a community that's used to going out, often I feel like what I've read is like in the bush, right? You're going out into nature to find some sort of hidden spot to poo, and now someone is building you a latrine, an outhouse, and they're like, here, go inside of this dank shed and poop into this hole. You're like, I'd rather not, actually. I have a very nice, way of doing this somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I was just going to add that, family I visited in India, they did that until the floods came. So I just think, again, with this era of climate change, weather is making that harder to do.
So I think we're beginning, and maybe Julia, the mic could be yours, to get into some of this behavior change. So, John, you brought up this market development, and I think, there's so much that's in there, and it makes me think, of course, about our own system, where we don't even think about a sanitation market. It's like a struggle to get people to pay for sanitation, and I feel like bridging that gap of how these situations are different is almost a whole other conversation. But you did touch on the way that, connected, but it's just like a huge topic. The way that you can't just drop latrines someplace and expect that people are going to use them, right? We have to actually cultivate the behavioral responses to that. And Julia, that's a lot of your work, right? So can you speak to what we've learned about how to do that well, or what we're still trying to learn, maybe?
Yeah. Behavior change is this huge topic, and you could sort of apply it any number of ways. One thing we have to look at is that these latrines, as you're saying, are placed somewhere, and then people don't even want to use them. So how do you sort of bridge that gap? And this whole notion that people will sort of do what's good, do what's right, has been our fatal flaw for such a long time, rather than looking at, what are these things that are going to improve practice, improve behaviors. And so some of, I think, what I try to do is really break down very systematically, and yes, it's science, and yes, it's marketing, but what are those things that are most influential in the practice or non-practice of a behavior? Mm-hmm. Some of it is knowledge, and some of it's social norms, what people are saying, but some of it is just access to really good products and services. So to really, for each sort of setting, you don't decide whoever those people are, you actually need to consult them, and it's not a monolith either. There'll be different segments thinking. So it's to break it down that way, and just through, it can be more and less rigorous. It could be a randomized controlled trial, or it can really be going out and talk to 15 people, whatever you can do in different settings, but to try and say, okay, what's going to influence that behavior? I think the other thing is we at least used to focus, it's their behavior, those peasants, those farmers in the urban area, and it's usually our behavior that needs to change, or people throughout what we call the value chain, but people sort of throughout the system. So maybe it's the education, the agricultural outreach worker, it's their behavior. So it's sort of within the institutions, it's all of those actors who we need to put that behavioral lens on to see what is that behavior they're doing, and how can we influence throughout that system. So I know it's kind of out there what I'm saying, it's not a concrete example, but I think it's really trying to systematically say, how are we going to, what behavior do we want to influence, and then what's going to influence. And another way we try and get at it is to find out, who are those outliers, the few who are doing it right, or the ideal practice, the improved practice, and what let them do it in the same sort of resource poor context. How did they overcome it? And often then, they call it positive deviance. If you know statistics of a bell curve, it's those little outliers there that did it right. Just forget it. It's and so where that's the spark of innovation usually, and it's what kids are fat and plump in a village where the other kids are really struggling, and what did they do? It's their mom mixed some brine shrimp into the gruel, and that just gave it the boost. Whatever it is, but it's to look and find out what are those sort of cues and clues.
So I'm curious, maybe is there a good example that would help us have a sense of this? And then maybe John, I'd pass it back to you, and I'm curious, you can, I just want to get both these questions out in my head. So where are some examples that maybe it has worked really well? And also, do you think the shift towards a market-based approach has really changed that? Because I think there's a difference between a government or an aid organization saying, here, we want to help you, we're going to put this down, and a company that's like, we want to make money off of you, and therefore it is our vested interest to figure out how to get you to buy this thing that we want you to do. So is that what's shifted things, or how, yeah?
Go for it.
I mean, I think if this is sort of like the question of like, I mean, market-based approaches in sanitation are relatively new. It's like 10 years maybe, right? But, I think that market-based work in other sectors, agriculture, even in healthcare to some extent, have in development have been going on and have had some success. I think we can definitely use this market-based approach to get greater buy-in from the government, from consumers. And it's frankly, it's not that much different than we bought. If we want a toilet, first of all, we have to, because those regulations, as I talked about, are there. Like, if you build a house here, there's no way you're building your house without a toilet, right? So, that's what I mean about the policy regulatory environment, right? It's like, Home Depot is there, we go there, and we do that because there's laws, there's codes, there's standards we have to follow to actually do that. I think, just building maybe a little bit on what Julie was saying, like, I think we are starting to see this shift in development work, which is frankly very long overdue. It's really moving away from this, like, patronizing, like, giver mentality, or
beneficiary.
Yeah, exactly. Or we've got the money, we're giving people these toilets. It's like that's not, and we're really honestly trying to move to like a partnership mentality. There's still a long way to go, and it's really messy to get there. But I think this is sort of where we've got to go with this. And unfortunately, a lot of the sanitation work, as we've sort of been discussing, has been sort of this patronizing approach, right? Even if that wasn't the intention, right? There's been, especially with all this open defecation, there's been a lot of like naming and shaming, versus looking at the root causes of what these behavior change pieces are. And Julia mentioned it, like really, frankly, a lot of the behavior change around sanitation is like, if people actually had affordable, desirable products instead of this dank toilet, right? But something that was nice, that was clean, that could be clean, they'd probably be using it and wanting to purchase it much more frequently. But we just haven't been, those products just haven't existed, those services haven't existed for just too many people.
Just to add the culturally responsive note that I think you were bringing in, Julia.
Yeah.
Like, what does the community actually want? What is their habit? What will go along with their lifestyle? That's not a change in so much as something that facilitates what they already want.
And Shawn, you had asked for, like, in your questions that you sent us out, like you mentioned like this idea of a flop. And I thought I could give an example of that might illustrate some of this cultural insensitivity. So like, I think like around 15 years ago, right, there were these efforts to actually get children in communities where there was a lot of open defecation to go around and like, actually the NGOs handed out these like flags, and the kids would run around the community and put these flags in the poo. So they were like poo flags to show where people were open defecating around the village. Which, at the time we're like, oh, this is really cute. This is fun. This is interesting, But in reality, it just kind of shows you like, how culturally insensitive like some of these sanitation efforts were. Anyway.
So maybe you could speak a little bit about how this works here, right? So we saw a bit of in the show what the cultural, and we all live. We live or are visiting here, so we have some sense of what the culture is like in this country around taboos. So how do you, as a marketing professional, trying to get people to talk about these issues, how do you work with this culture to either like, because I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a tricky thing of both like a sort of jujitsu trying to work with it, and then other times trying to like push past it and break through it. What do you find to be successful?
Yeah, I love that you said jujitsu, because I was thinking about how to answer this question, and I feel like I do that pivot. I struggle a lot between the two. I think one thing from where I sit on Defeat GD, for years we've been so a couple things. always very solutions focused in our messaging. I bring that up specifically because there's a lot of doom and gloom right now, and I think people are just so tired. So I think from the beginning, sort of that sense of playfulness is really appreciated just beyond areas of taboo, but just in general for like the world that we're living in right now. So it's just sort of like on a big picture way. But, you know, I think, yes, it's always been our bent to sort of lean in to puns and playfulness about, you know, we're working in diarrhea. We're going to lean into the fact that people are like, okay, what? This is weird. And I'm kind of surprised, though, that the pivot, it's very easy and quick to make, actually. Like, once you kind of, like, get people comfortable, be like, okay, like, this is a thing, this is what we're talking about, it's actually very almost easy, I want to say easy, for people to be like, wait, so diarrhea, like, kills children? But I find that initial icebreaker is extremely important, but I think there's room for both. And just to give you a quick example, you know, this last year, I'm sure everyone knows that November 19th is World Toilet Day. I'm sure you all know.
They're an educated audience. You know, they've got
Everyone
it
knows that. Mark it on your calendars. So last year, my team, we did a campaign called Untapped, the potential for sustainable sanitation, where we talked about the linkages between climate change and sanitation as a solution. And, you know, the campaign, we had the Untapped being kind of a playful play on words, but I think the heaviness of the topic was it didn't really meet where people were in terms of the zeitgeist of like, we're really tired. And I found that a lot of people were actually finding our old campaign, which was we need a universal health revolution, like LOO for revolution, because people, I think, were craving that lightness and that joy. And we had a lot of like playful and like bright graphics. So I think getting back to our roots a little bit, our most famous campaign was the poo haiku competition. So, you know, there's like...
Your website's going to be broken tonight. People going out there, finding that poo haiku.
Yes, the haiku cannot be contained. So we should, on the spot. So I think that... there's nuance to humor as well. We don't want to make light of the issue ever, but we want to make light of, I know you're uncomfortable, let's name the discomfort, let's laugh about it, and then let's really talk about it. And like I said, that pivot happens more quickly than I would have thought.
Yeah. And I think you raise a really good point that I know I've confronted and have engaged in conversation around, which is what does it mean to make light of an issue that makes a lot of people sick, that kills people? And what is that balance where, you know, kind of like you were pointing to, John, too, we're not laughing at anybody. We're trying to sort of laugh with and or create lightness around something. Mm-hmm. Maybe Julia, too, are there examples from your work? Just any example that makes it really concrete of like, here was the situation and here's how we figured out the thing, and or the place where humor comes in. 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. I know that was out.
I know. I was like, you know, it's funny because we're talking about a range of things and a range of actors.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't use humor a whole lot, but that's not to say that. So I don't. That's what I'm not having an example. I mean, what?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a funny example. More
Exactly.
just thinking about.
But yeah, and just sort of the end of that. I mean, breaking stigmas again, and it also what you need is to find the people who can take the risks to push enough. You know, whether it's, you know, me coming in and making fun of myself to say, and, you know, me talking about where, you know, where's the toilet? No, it's like, where do you shit? Or, and then making some, whatever, you know, but someone who can take the hit. And it might not be the outsider. It could also be someone there, someone stable enough. So to find the people who are sort of strong enough to risk that piece. They don't get shunned for bringing up the taboo topics. I mean, we haven't talked, I'm bringing another, but talking about menstruation, which is part of the whole wash, water, and sanitation is, it's stigmatized. But like the minute you bring it up, it's like every man has like a mother and sisters, and people will dive in pretty soon, you find, as long as you get the right I call them, icebreakers. Literally, I get pictures of the Titanic, just wrong, but like just pushing through the ice there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know about you, but as a someone in the sector, I also know when I've done the wrong thing and someone closes up and I go, well, we're not gonna be able to talk about this today. Like, I'm gonna have to back off because they're not into this right now.
And you mentioned like groups that can take the risk. One trend I've seen in behavior change and sort of changing social norms is using school children, because they are still in the process of developing what those social norms are for themselves. So they're more amenable to change. They are some of the best champions for cleanliness and hand washing, and you find in school hygiene ambassadors in Zambia. I visited, like the kids were like, it was almost like being the class president, like they were hygiene ambassadors. So, and then they would then say, you're not washing your hands or you're not doing this correctly, and they would go home and hold their families accountable in a way that, really engaged them and their power. I mean, and it reminds me too of how we're just seeing more and more youth being engaged in climate action. I think it's just very similar type of movement that we're seeing.
Yeah, well, you said the word power. Yeah, go for it, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think now, going with the flow of this conversation now, I think one of if we go back to the market-based piece, I think an important part for us is helping businesses learn how to have this conversation with the households, right? Because they've got to go and have a sales conversation about these products and services, and it really is a delicate conversation, and it frankly becomes a behavior change conversation, because what we don't do is say, oh my God, we've got this great new toilet, you want to buy it. Like, that does not work. Making a sales pitch to a household who's very poor, doesn't have a lot of money, has been open defecating, that does not work. So what we actually do, we engage them in a very specific, what we call like a problem-led sales conversation. And these businesses actually sit down with the customer. They actually have a photo book, like a slideshow almost, Shawn, like taking from your example, and they sit down and they have this conversation with the household. They go through what the problem is and what the cost of that problem is. Not only the social cost, but also the real financial cost. Like, okay, hey, here, and they base it on what's going on in that particular household, right? So if okay, how much have you spent in the last year on doing repairs to your toilet? You've had to buy new wood to fix the slats because they became rotten. How much did you spend to go take your kid to the doctor to buy diarrhea medicine, right? So they actually walk the household through these, through this conversation, and then not until they're pretty sure the household understands this, that's when they actually explain what the potential solution is. So it's actually, what we call it is like, we're raising the decision intelligence of the consumer, in fact. And so it does actually become like a behavior change conversation that the sales agent or the business itself, a lot of times the businesses themselves are their own sales agents, and that does work. I mean, we have in Ethiopia, we have 30% of conversion rate. So.
Wow.
And that's just the first pass.
That is some deep canvassing, I know we're just about out of time, so I'd love to do maybe one last pass, and I feel like we've come to understand the problem pretty well in this time, and Hope, you'd also mentioned our power, and so maybe I'd love to end with now that we're knowledgeable, we've got our I'm a pooper pins, but what else can we do, to have a positive impact on this issue, whether that's something you want to offer that addresses particularly, folks who don't live in this country that we can contribute to in some way, or also the sanitation issues we face here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting. What you say for domestic issues is the same I say for Defeat DD, which is just talk about it. I think that's probably the biggest and most important thing, whether it's diarrhea or menstruation or, sexual health in a way, all these taboo topics are we do no service to public health if we're not talking about it. And I think since we're in DC, I'll just say from a policy perspective, one thing that you find, this is a little bit wonky, but one thing you find in international development funding is that health programs and water and sanitation and hygiene programs are funded differently, which makes it really difficult. It continues to silo these two issues such that it's hard to even talk about WASH as a health issue if they're funded totally differently. So in as much as you do this advocacy with policymakers, demanding better integration for that is better serving children and like how their lives are lived, would be another thing I'd say. And follow us on social media at DefeatDD. Follow Shawn at the Poop Project. We're always giving you ways to get engaged and just to talk about it to everyone you know, because this is a huge problem that is its own solution if we just invest in it. So
The best way to talk about it might be through a haiku. So,
Indeed.
You know, get
Hashtag
thinking.
poo haiku.
Yes. I mean, to all this, yes. I think, to get engaged, I always just encourage people to do what floats your boat too, and whatever you do best. Take that to the issue. So, lobby, advocate, social media, absolutely. I think it's to apply the mindset to that, solutions exist, and just to try and support local creativity, ingenuity, entrepreneurship, to support that in whatever way you can, because the solutions really are there. And I was struck in your slideshow that the covered box, whatever it's called.
Oh, the closed stool.
The closed stool. That's actually an innovation we have now. These toilets, we use them in Canada, we use them in urban areas. These, what are they called? The boxes.
Container-based sanitation.
Exactly. But that was 500 years old. It's like
That's
I didn't.
a bucket.
Exactly. I didn't. But that the solutions are there, and to just to support that creativity, and that's where I go.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just get your checkbooks out. Or tell your rich friends to give us all lots of money. No, I mean, seriously. I think instead of, you guys know what to do. I'm just going to tell you a nice story about an Ethiopian woman that I met, entrepreneur. Her name's Tigist. She lives in Alo Watando in near Hawassa in Ethiopia. One of the 500 businesses that PSI works with in Ethiopia on sanitation market development work. She's now, through selling toilets, using that sales approach that I explained to you about, she's now out there actually making enough money to put her kids through school, to support her family. She's like the breadwinner, earning a decent living, earning the respect of her community. I mean, we've got to, what we all have to do is help the tea guests out there to actually do their good work, right? That's what we got to do. However we do that, I think you guys already talked about it. Advocate, give money, get on social media. Tell let's get Shawn's show at the Madison Square Garden or the Capital One Arena. Screw the Caps. We got poo.
Amazing. All right, everybody, let's give this panel a round of applause. Thank you so much. And just from a local place, to say, get one of these toilet tank banks. You can save $1 gallon per flush. You don't have to flush for pee, right? There are ways to save even where we are in this city. So with that, please go on to your journeys. Poop proud, poop in peace, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
You want to add to my hair color?